family, a little family history, and brag on my mom. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you how my family's got to the area. Hopefully won't tear up too much. And then brag on my mom a little bit. I'm going to share some stories family stories that I think are entertaining as we go along. And hopefully you will too. So again, thank you all. And I want to say thank you to the folks that do come here, that aren't from here, that come down here and appreciate our local history, because so many don't. And I really appreciate the ones that I know that do. Okay, first photograph. Hopefully we've got them in the right order. We worked on this one.
I don't know. I hope so, Frank. Is that right?
Yes. These folks are my great-grandparents. That's John and Mary Reynolds. They were from Newton, Alabama, which is just northeast of Dothan in southeastern Alabama. They came to Nocatee in 1904 when my grandmother was 1 year old. She was the youngest of a bunch of kids. Unfortunately, I don't know the details of why they came to Nocatee. I mean, what I do know is apparently, from family stories, he was well-to-do, owned citrus groves, and people would come to him to borrow money. So I don't know, maybe that he was just easy to get money from, or maybe he had lots of money, I don't know. Unfortunately, I wish I knew more about why they came to Nocatee and how they got here. I had a cousin, John Reynolds, in Arcadia that was really involved in the DeSoto County Historical Society, and I just knew that John would know. And I called him up one day and he says, I'm sorry, I don't. So I know a little bit more about the Ridgells and the Desguins than I do about the Reynolds. But anyway, they came to Nocatee in 1904. Again, my grandmother, Rosa Fred, everybody called her Freddie, everybody but us, we called her Roni. I don't know where that came from. But all her friends called her Freddie. And she was 1 year old when they came to Nocatee. So I missed being, the story goes that to be a Florida cracker, a genuine one, you got to be third generation. I missed it by 1 year, but I'm close. I got grandkids that are seventh and eighth generation Floridians, so I think it's my grandmother, the next one.
Oh, you want the next one? I'm sorry, Frank. Oops.
Yeah, so this is my grandmother in her early 20s. Yeah, she was a good-looking woman. And so anyway, she was already down here, grew up in Nocatee, taught school in Gardner, went to Florida State College for Women.
Yes.
And the next one, my granddad, Frank Ridgell. So this is Rosa Fred Reynolds. Frank Ridgell. He was born in Slocum, Alabama, which is just southwest of Dothan. They grew up within 50 miles of each other, and of course never met till he came to Nocatee. The story was why he came to Florida, how he ended up here. He didn't graduate. He was the youngest of 7 kids. Didn't graduate high school. And back in the day, he had friends that would, every season, they'd come to Florida to pick oranges. And one of his buddies sent him a postcard of a Florida sunset silhouetted behind a coconut palm. And when they got back from picking citrus, he asked me, he says, is this real? And they said yes. And so he said right then and there he decided he was going to go to Florida. I would tease him and I said, you sure it wasn't one of those postcards where the good-looking young ladies get bit on the butt by an alligator? He said, no, it was a sunset. so anyway, he decided right then and there he was going to come to Florida one way or the other. So he enrolled in business school in Dothan and got his to become a payroll clerk. And so he got through school, took out an ad in the Florida Times-Union. He first came to Lake Garfield, which is up in North Florida. Ended up being transferred to the work at the crate. He was the payroll clerk at the crate factory in Nocatee. And if you're familiar with Nocatee at all, as you're coming down 17, if you take a left to go across the river to Kings Highway, when you get to the railroad tracks, there's a citrus pack and their hauling place on the left-hand side. All the trailers are there. That's about where the crate factory was. So he came to Nocatee in 1923, and it turns out, something I just found out recently, is his future brother-in-law was the manager of the crate factory. So some of my grandmother's brothers were working there, And she would come by and visit. Well, he was sitting up front in the big picture window, doing the seat. He said, I was always pretty good at ciphering, working on payroll, and this young lady would walk up and down the sidewalk, and he said, I need to meet that young lady. So eventually they did, they met, obviously liked each other, ended up in 1925, he was offered the opportunity to, 1925, so he was born in 1901. He's 24 years old. He was offered the opportunity to manage the lumber yard, which was here in town, owned by the same folks that owned the crate factory. And he's obviously nervous about that. He's only 24 years old, but he took the opportunity, and the lumber yard was located on Taylor Road, where the extra space storage is, with the mural on the side of it, right on the railroad tracks. That's where his lumber yard was located. So he came here in 1925 to run the lumber yard. In 1926, after my grandmother graduated, got her teacher's degree from Florida State College for Women in Tallahassee, they got married in 1926. So one of the family stories is, before they got married, and back to Nocatee, there is a Reynolds Road in Nocatee. It doesn't hit 17, it's off the path, but that goes out to where the road homestead was, before you hit Airport Road between Reynolds of 17 and Airport Road. But anyway, the story goes, he was having dinner one day, Sunday dinner, and my great-grandmother, Mary, says, Frank, I need to go to the store, about running me to town. He says, yes, ma'am. So they get in the car, they're running down the road. This is her baby we're talking about. He was interested. She leaned over and said, Frank, you ever hurt my little girl? I'm gonna kill you. He would tell that one and just laugh, but anyway. So 1926, they got married. My mom was born in 1928. Her sister Jean in 1930. What's the next photo?
Okay, let's move up.
Oh, okay. Let me back up the Desguins, then I'll catch up. Go ahead and leave it there. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next one. That's all right.
Go to the next one.
So that was Frank, and we called her Roni. Frank and Rosa Freddie Ridgel. We called him Big Hank. The story goes, when I was little, I couldn't say Frank, so I called him Hank. So he was Big Hank, I was Little Hank. He became Big Hank for everybody. And again, my grandmother, how we came up with Roni, again, I don't know. But that was Big Hank and Roni. Frank and Freddie Ridgel. These are my dad's parents, Louie and Gertrude Desguin. The interesting thing about this to me, anyway, is my great-grandmother, Mary Reynolds, her maiden name was Mullins, Mullins. My grandmother Desguin's maiden name was Mullen, Mullen. So I figure somewhere way back when, I'm my own 18th cousin, 6 times removed. I don't know. But anyway, they all came from somewhere in Ireland at some point. They were born in upstate New York, around Oneida Lake, which is just north of Syracuse. Both of them born in 1898. My granddad tried to enlist. He grew up in a French-speaking family. He tried to enlist in the Army of World War I as a translator, but he's too young. So he went to work at a munitions factory, and my grandmother worked there too, and that's how they met. Well, they were married in 1918. Dad was born in 1926. I think the next one is, okay, this is my dad, and this is his cousin, Freddie. Who was, excuse me, they were raised as brothers. Even though they were cousins, they were raised as brothers because Freddie, we called him Mooney. His mom died in childbirth, and his dad was a big-time entrepreneur in Florida. And so the sisters passed Mooney around for a while until my grandmother, when he was about this age, said, okay, that's enough. We'll take him and we'll raise him as Vic's brother. So this is when okay, what's the next one? Okay. So again, upstate New York, my dad was in Oneida. When he was about 10 years old, my granddad had during the Depression, had lots of jobs. One of them was, Hey, Kathy. One of them was managing a theater in upstate New York, which he liked. So he told my Uncle Fred, Mooney's dad, had a chain of theaters in Central Florida, from Arcadia up through Sebring, Fort Meade, basically up 17. And so my granddad had said to him, if you ever find a place, that a family can operate in Florida, a theater, he said, we might be interested. So one day my Uncle Fred called him up and says, I found a perfect place for you. And he goes, yeah, where is it? He said, Punta Gorda, Florida. And of course he says, where in the H is Punta Gorda, Florida? But anyway, they decided they would pack up and move down, and they arrived September 9th, 1936. This is about a year after they got here. But this is about how old Dad and Mooney were when they got here. The family story is that when on their way down, they stopped in North Carolina, and for breakfast, the waitress brings out grits, rags, whatever. Well, Mooney and Dad look at the grits, and they want cream and sugar for their cream of wheat. Of course, they get the waitress got a real good laugh out of that. But anyway, they came there to operate the theater that is where where the Ace Hardware store is on Marion Avenue. The vacant lot where their parking lot is where the theater was. Okay, so what's the next one? That was a new theater. Okay, this is Mom. When she first went to Florida State. Excuse me, wasn't Florida State then. Florida State College for Women. Followed her mom. This is her up at Florida State. Then she decided she wanted to get a nursing degree, and so she went to Duke. Go ahead and do the next one.
Okay.
This is her at Duke. And the funny story about that to me is, she's from here. She'd never seen snow, ice, So they get up there. One of the other young ladies on the floor had ice skates, and they got more marble floors in the dorms. So they all put on the ice skates and skated on the marble floors, and got into a little bit of trouble about that.
Yeah, no kidding.
But what happened is she was home on Christmas break. Got appendicitis. And so she was in the hospital. She and Dad had been dating by then. I mean, they grew up together within 2 blocks of each other. And started dating, after high school. And Dad went to visit her and checking on her, how you doing? And asked her, said, do you want to go back to Duke? She said, not really. So he said, well, will you marry me? And obviously she said yes. So what's the next one? Oh, sorry about that. Okay, this is a good story. I don't know if this is at Inglewood or where the story I'm going to tell you about, but Dad was a corpsman in the Navy during the war, and there was a bunch of them. They had some friends, Nellie, Futch, and Nellie and Dan. And they were related to Kathy there. They were caretakers of a fishing lodge on Pine Island. Excuse me. And of course, the summertime, no AC, it's closed. That's when they're taking, it's closed down. But the Futches were there taking care of it, and so everybody knew them. So a bunch of kids were down there having a good time, fishing, swimming, jumping off the dock. Somebody pushed Mom. She got pushed off the dock and hit a piling, and got her leg cut pretty badly from the barnacles. Well, Dad being a corpsman, and everybody knew that. They were all buddies from here, from Punta Gorda. So he's taking care of her, cleaning it up. And he says, you know what? That whole time, she never complained. And she said, I knew right then I was going to marry that woman. So then step back to when she was in the hospital, so he asked her to marry him. And so they were married February 5th. Oh, next one, I think. Okay, this is probably soon after they got married. That's in front of my grandma's house, which is no longer there, on the corner of Olympia and Sullivan. But he grew up on the corner of Olympia and Sullivan. She grew up on the corner of Olympia and Taylor, so they were a block away going through high school. I think the next one is her in her wedding dress with that's mom in her wedding dress and my grandma. Okay, go ahead.
You want me to move ahead, Frank?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see what's next. I can't remember what's next. Oh, this is interesting, I think. So anyway, this is their marriage certificate, and if you can see here, they were married February 5th, 1951. Well, I was born November 5th, 1951.
Uh-oh.
9 months to the day.
It's all right.
And they spent their honeymoon on Inglewood Beach at a cottage beach cottage that Punta Gorda Fish Company had. And when they got back, as the years went on, every time people would ask Mom, so where'd you all go on your honeymoon? And she'd smile and say, well, we went to the beach to get a little sun. And they did. Actually, ended up with 5 sons and a daughter. So, I guess I wasn't good enough. I had to keep trying. Okay, so more about Mom. I'll go put it back. When she got married, she, of course, started raising a family, and she didn't finish her degree at the time, but she started a private kindergarten in the late 50s. And she operated the kindergarten until early 70s, when she had to stop because of her health. But this is one of her early kindergarten pictures. That's my sister Jeannie when she was about 5, so that's probably 1956, 57, something like that. Is that the last photograph?
I don't know. We'll find out. No.
Oh, okay. So here she was busy. So this is obviously me, Louie, Jeannie, Mike, Joel, and Larry. No, Joel and Larry.
There you go.
Okay, so that's the 6 blood brothers, and then of course Mom, unfortunately, she had breast cancer. Passed away when she was 48 years old in 1977, and Dad remarried a few years later, and so we have an adopted married Charlotte, adopted Charlotte's son Shane, so there's 7 of us. Okay, so Mom, she kind of had her education interrupted, but she always wanted to go back, and one of the things I'm proudest about is she decided, starting in the early 60s, she'd already been up to Tallahassee, Florida State College for Women. By then it was Florida State University. She decided she would go back to school in the summertime to get her degree. So every summer she would pack us up and we'd go to Tallahassee. And Dad and the grandparents, they would take turns coming up watching the kids while Mom went to school. And that's to me, I just can't imagine how she did it, but she did it. It took her several years. Probably, like I said, I was probably 8 or 9 when she, around 1960, she started doing that. And it was always a big time for us. We loved going to Tallahassee. It was really cool. There were actually hills and water that ran downhill. It was the coolest thing. We didn't have much of that or any of it down here, So we always were excited to go back to Tallahassee. And then she got her master's at South Florida in 1971, the same year Louie graduated from high school. And I should have tried to find the photograph of them both in their cap and gowns, but I forgot about that until just now. Anyway, so Mom had the private kindergarten she started in the late 50s, went to Florida State every summer for several years, got her degree in childhood education, and then got her master's. Well, if that wasn't enough, she was always interested in local history. And in Tallahassee, they had what they call the Youth Museum. And that always impressed her. So when she was about done in Tallahassee, she came back in 1969. She got a bunch of local folks together, and they started the Youth Museum of Charlotte County. And it was art classes mainly in the beginning, but over the years it evolved. It eventually became the County Museum, which unfortunately they closed down a few years ago, and we've been trying ever since then to get them to find a place to reopen one. And we're working on even though it'll be a few years, we're working on the cultural center now, and when they get that rebuilt, to have a dedicated space in there for the county museum to get it reopened. A couple of commissioners are in favor of that. Hopefully we can get another one or two. But anyway, so she was instrumental, and she and Dad were instrumental in starting the youth museum, which became the county museum. If that wasn't enough, when she was in high school, she'd been on the swim team, and they were pretty good. She played basketball. She was on the swim team. And I think one year they finished second. And there were only 3 or 4 young ladies on the swim team. And she, my aunt, and then a couple of other young ladies. And they finished second in the state against this big East Coast team.
All right.
Well, at some point, I don't know exactly when, they disbanded the swim team at Charlotte High. But when I was in school in the 60s, they didn't have one. When, I forgot to tell you, I forgot to mention something. Back to my granddad, Frank Ridgel, who ran the lumber yard. Dennis's dad worked for him for years and years and years. And they were great buddies. They loved each other. So his dad, Virgil, worked with my granddad, Frank, for a long, long time. But anyway, Mom was bound and determined that Charlotte High was going to have a swim team again. And I don't know, those of y'all that have been around for a while probably knew Dave Hull, who unfortunately, from his perspective perhaps, was athletic director at Charlotte High at the time. And Mom would just bend his ear every time she had an opportunity. She would hawk. Of course, they didn't have a pool. Was the biggest reason that they could use, because when she was in high school, they used a pool that was at the hotel on the bayfront. That's where they had their swim. That's where they had their competitions. So they had no pool. So she not only had to convince the county commissioners that they needed to build a pool in Charlotte County, she needed to convince. Once that was done, then she needed to convince the school they needed to reinstitute the swim teams. So she was after, and the commissioners would see her coming, and they'd sneak out the back door. And one of my brothers tells a story that, I don't know, if those of you that have been around a long time will remember Bob Shedd. He was a local doctor for years, and he was county commissioner. And Mom had been stalking him, and went to catch him at the courthouse, and they said, "Oh no, he's busy. He's gone for the day." And she'd seen his car outside. She knew that wasn't true. So she goes out, sneaks out back, and waits at his car and catches him coming out the back door. And so she bends his ear about the county needs to build a swimming pool so that the Charlotte High can have a swim team again. So I can remember getting crab trap buoys from Ed Hendrickson and stringing them for the lane markers in the backyard. So she was very instrumental in getting the museum started in the county, very instrumental in getting the swim team reinstituted. Finally, Dave Holt relented and said, yes, we're going to have a swim team next year. So what else can I tell you about Mom? Played the organ at St. Charles. I can remember pumping the organ. She tried to teach us how to play the piano. We weren't interested. I never got past chopsticks. But if anybody's got any questions, maybe I'll think of something else I wanted to say. But that's the last photo, isn't it, or not? I can't remember.
Wait a minute, let me sec. Make sure.
Frank, did they build the pool?
Yeah, that's.
Yep, that's the last photo.
Frank,
Yes,
when
ma'am.
they built the swimming pool, was it over at the middle school in Punta Gorda?
That was still a junior high. Still junior high.
Yeah.
It was still junior high.
Yeah.
That was because Michael swam on the team. He
So
graduated in
did-
78.
Right.
So I'm not sure. I think the junior high was there. Or soon,
it
right
was.
around, they had just built it, or
Yeah,
there
it
soon
It
after.
was Frank,
Yeah.
because Elizabeth was on the swim team in
So was
78,
Dennis. They're on the team.
and April was cross street.
Frank, would you tell the story of what I think it was your grandfather in the theater, right? In the
Right.
theater, when the blacks could have come to the town and what they
Okay,
did.
yeah, I mean, the story goes, of course, my granddad was from upstate New York, and they came here in September of 1936. And the story goes, as it was related to me, is that here's this new guy from New York. He's not from down here. So some of the black folks approached him and said, would it be okay if we started coming to the theater? Said, we'll sit in the balcony. No, we don't want any problem. And he said, well, let me think about it. So he asked some people from here, and they said, that wouldn't be a good idea, because some people are not going to like that, and they're going to make a big deal out of it. So he thought about it, and went and bought a projector, rented a warehouse building, an old warehouse building on the corner of Milas and East Charlotte, vacant lot now, put in some bench seats, and what would happen is, it started before I was a kid, but I can remember when I was a kid, popcorn and bagging it up and putting it in boxes to take there for popcorn. But he only had one projector there, so they start the movie in town. When the first reel was over, my granddad or my uncle would get on their bike, put it in their basket, and they'd run it out there, and they'd start the movie there, and then shuttle the reels back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But yeah, and a lot of folks still today, of course, back then we called it the quarters, and things have changed, thank goodness. But I mean, I'll still have people, my age or older. They'll say, "Boy, we remember your granddaddy bringing the movie pictures to us," because they couldn't see. The black folks could not go to the movies here back then, so they really appreciated that happening. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I get off track sometimes. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Mark's granddad played the organ at that theater.
Oh,
The
did he?
silent movies, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he did.
Okay. Yeah, I think, but they got it in 1936, so that was before they owned it.
Yeah.
Oh, the funny story about that is, I think it's funny anyway. My Uncle Fred was what you would call an entrepreneur. Now, I don't know if he had any business dealings during Prohibition, but he always had money and drove a big Packard. And the story goes, and I cannot remember the guy's name. He was one of the pioneers of Punta Gorda, but he owned the theater in town. And what he would do is he would make a deal with somebody. He'd sold it 2, maybe 3 times, and he'd make a deal with somebody that he would take the payments. Well, business got bad, they couldn't make the payments, he'd take the theater back and then try and sell it to somebody else. Well, this had happened 2 or 3 times.
Was it Goldstein? Was it Harry Goldstein that owned it?
No, I think it was one of Jordan, I think.
Was it Jordan? Oh yeah, the Jordan brothers had originally
I'm not
started.
positive, but I think it was
They
one
were
of them.
the original people who
thinking it
started
was
the
one of them.
theater. You're right.
But I don't want to say for sure because I'm not absolute. But anyway,
Yeah, it probably was. the
so
Jones.
my uncle had found this place for sale, and so he called up my granddad, said, "Come on down. I got this place. We're going to buy it, And so I'm thinking I don't know what the business deal was between him and my grandparents, but they had raised his son for 15 years. So I think he just wanted to help him, But anyway, so they go in to talk to the gentleman, and they're kibitzing back and forth, and my Uncle Fred says, well, would you take $10,000 cash? And he says, sure. Yeah, right. Sure. So my granddad says, my Uncle Fred says to my granddad Louie, come on, let's go outside and talk about this. So they go outside. He had a big old Packard, of course. Opens the trunk. He gets a suitcase out, $10,000 in cash. Goes back in. He lays it on the table and says, "Here's your $10,000." Of course, the guy, because that wasn't his business model. His business model was to get some money and then take it back and sell it again. And he was like, "Whoa, no!" And apparently his attorney was there, and he says, "Wait a minute, you made a deal with this guy. You said $10,000. There it is, cash. You need to sell the theater." So that's how my grandparents got in the theater business. My granddad at first, he ran the projector. My grandma took tickets. My dad and my uncle had the popcorn concession. So and I can remember going there as a kid, and I can remember how big it was. But you look at that lot now, and it's like, holy moly!
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I can't believe they had a theater here.
I know.
When did it close, Frank?
It closed when television came along in the early '60s. It closed.
Yeah, because I remember
Well,
going in there.
Yeah, me too.
They ran from 1936 to about 1960. They ran the theater in town. 1958, they bought the drive-in, which is where Town and Country Shopping Center is today. And with television, you know, that just really hurt the theater business. And of course, all the kids, Linda and Tommy, wanted to go to the drive-in. And so that was a much bigger attraction, larger venue than the theater downtown. So it just got to be too much for them. They closed the theater in town and ran the drive-in. So for about 2 or 3 years, they had 2 theater operations. But where was I going with that? Anyway, I'm sorry, I lost my chain of thought. It seems like
You
there's
still
something
had
else
the
I wanted to.
concession at the drive-in too.
Pardon me?
You still had the concession stand at the drive-in.
Yeah. And there was this little girl and lived in the village. Everybody loved her because she had a great personality. Everybody just loved her to death. Well, one day she went out in the woods by herself to harvest berries. Well, she was supposed to be back around lunchtime. She didn't come back. Later in the day, the day goes on, she's not back. Of course, her mother gets very worried, goes out looking for her, and finds her asleep on the forest floor. Tries to wake her up, can't wake her up. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? She runs back to the village, gets the shaman, medicine man, tells him what's going on. He says, well, take me to her. So she takes him out there, and she's trying to wake her up, can't wake her up. And the shaman looks at her and says, well, I know what's happened. And she goes, well, what? She says, well, the witch that lives in the sky is always jealous, has always been jealous of your daughter, because everybody loves her so much. She's out here by herself. The witch has come down, has taken her soul, her spirit, and taken it back up into the sky. And if we cannot get her spirit back within 3 days, she's going to die. And of course, the mom is, oh my gosh. So they go back to the village. Shaman explains it to the villagers. Everybody's just distraught because everybody loves this little girl. So they're crying and lamenting, and somebody says, wait a minute, wait, I know what we can do. Everybody goes, what? So we'll get Bear. Bear is the strongest climber in the forest. The bear will find a tall tree, just climb up the top of the tree, go find the little girl, bring her back, everything will be happy. And they'll go, oh, great idea, great. So they call Bear into the village, and they explain what's going on. Bear says, no problem. Bear goes off, gone all day. Everybody's wondering, what's going on? Finally, towards the end of the day, Bear comes back into the village just exhausted, head on. Everybody's going, what happened? He says, I'm so sorry. I found the highest tree in the forest. I climbed as high as I could go. I couldn't get high enough to reach the witch and your little girl spirit. Everybody's going, oh no, what are we gonna do? Just 2 days left. And somebody says, wait, let's call Eagle. Eagle's the strongest flyer. Excuse me. Strongest flyer. Surely the eagle can fly up as high as it needs to go and find the little girl's spirit, find the witch, find the little girl's spirit, bring it back, everything will be happy. Everybody's like, oh, great idea, let's call Eagle. So they call Eagle in the forest. Eagle comes strutting in the forest, and they explain what's happening, and Eagle goes, no problem, I'll be back in an hour. As the day goes on, Eagle nowhere to be seen. Everybody, past lunch and late afternoon, everybody's really getting worried. Well, here comes Eagle, back and just head hung low, just exhausted. What happened? Well, I'm so sorry. I flew as high as I could go, and I could not get high enough to find the witch and the little girl's spirit. And now everybody's really worried, because there's only 1 day left. And they're just lamenting and wailing, and just, they don't know what to do. And all of a sudden they hear this voice says, I can help. They look around, they go, who said that? The voice says, well, down here, I can help. And they look down, it's a little mouse. They're going, yeah, right. It says, Bear, the strongest climber in the forest. Eagle, the strongest flyer. They couldn't help us. What in the world can you do? What do you think you can do? And the mouse says, well, look up in the sky. You see all those holes? See all those clouds? And what do they see all those holes in the clouds? I said, yeah. I said, well, those mice are good at they can get in and out anywhere, any nooks and crannies. So they go, oh, well, please, if you can help us, we've only got 1 day left. If you can help us, we will do anything. We will give you anything is there anything that you would like? And he goes, well, now that you mention it, yeah. They go, well, what is it? Anything. And he says, well, you know, you all have plenty of corn enough for everybody. And every time my family come into your cornfield or your corn crib, you run us off. You beat us with sticks. You run us off. There's plenty of corn for everybody. So if I do this for you and I'm successful, the deal is that I and my family get as much corn as we want. And they all go, what a deal. I mean, how much can a mouse eat, right? So they go, absolutely, deal. So mouse goes off, climbs up in the clouds, goes in the nooks and the crannies, gets the little good spirit, brings it back. Shaman puts the spirit back, and the little girl, she wakes up. Everybody is ecstatic for a while. Because if you're familiar with mice, you know, first there's 2, then there's 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Well, it wasn't long before mice were overrunning the place and eating all the corn. There wasn't enough corn for the people, and the people are starving. So they have a meeting with the elders, and they're going, this is crazy, we're starving to death. And the elders say, there's nothing we can do. We made a deal with the mouse. The mouse upheld its part of the deal. We can't go back, can't renege on our deal. And they're going, well, what are we going to do? They're eating all of our food. We're going to starve. And all of a sudden they hear a voice says, well, I can help. And everybody looks around and said, who said that? And they look down on the ground, and it's a snake. And they go, well, how can you help? Well, you know, I and my family, we eat mice. You know? So we can help you. And they go, oh, please, 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 if you can do that, bring the mouse population under control, you know, then we won't renege on our deal. The mouse, you know, we don't want them all dead, you know, but it'll bring them under control. There'll be food for everybody. And they go, that's okay. And the snake goes, well, I have one condition. And everybody goes, oh, great. Here we go again. And they said, well, what is it? He said, well, if we're successful doing this, you know, when I and my family come into the village, the women folk are scared. And they get sticks and they chase us off and they beat us. So if we're going to make this deal, then everybody has to know that we're good snakes, we're friendly snakes, and that you'd leave us alone. We're helping you keep the mouse population under control. So the shaman says, I can fix that. I don't know if, I don't have a corn snake to show you, but if you're familiar, they're very brightly colored. And so the shaman colored the snake, and it was very bright orange and red and gold color, so that the people would know it's a good snake. The women folk would not run the snake off. So the snake and his family were happy. The mice not so happy, but there were still some of them around, and the elders didn't break their deal with the mice. So everybody, except for the mice, everybody lived happily ever after.